Straw served as the Foreign Affairs Secretary under British Prime Minister Tony Blair from 2001 to 2006. Last Thursday, he testified before the British-Iraq War Inquiry, a 5-member committee examining British involvement in the war and the circumstances which led to the 2003 invasion. In his testimony, Mr. Straw told the panel that he would have favored a diplomatic solution, but supported the war based on intelligence he received. This is 3 hours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our witness. The objectives of this session are to take evidence from the Right Honourable Jack Straw MP. You were Foreign Secretary from mid-2001 to mid-2006. This is in order to understand his role in the formulation of government policy on Iraq, his leadership of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the period running up to the start of military action in 2003, and in the post-conflict period. Now, this is the first time we shall be taking evidence from Mr. Straw, but we will have a further opportunity to hear from him towards the end of this phase of our hearings. He has given the inquiry an extensive written memorandum of evidence, for which we are grateful, and which is now up on our website. Now, this session will focus on events up to the summer of 2004. Remaining matters and issues surrounding legal advice will be covered at the later session in a couple of weeks' time. Now, with that, just two regular statements. We recognise that all witnesses are giving evidence based in part on their recollection of events, and we are, of course, cross-checking what we hear against the paper record. And I remind every witness that he will later be asked to sign a transcript of evidence to the effect that the evidence given is truthful, fair, and accurate. And with that, I'll ask Sir Roderick Lyne to open the questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your very helpful memorandum. I think this means that we're not going to have to go into all of the issues that we've already discussed quite thoroughly in a lot of detail. I slightly wonder if we shouldn't just ask the questions by numbers and let you reply to them. But what I'd like to cover first is the evolution of our strategy over Iraq, the way that the policy developed in 2002, the question of regime change, and then our negotiations in 2002 with the American administration, including about the Middle East peace process. And I think after me, my colleagues will want to go in more detail into questions of the presentation of policy in the autumn of 2002, the run-up to the conflict, the diplomatic endgame, and so on. So just to sort of set the scene. So if I start with the way that the strategy evolved, in 2001 and up to the middle of 2002, the government's official policy at that time, at least up to the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1409, the Goods Review List resolution on the 14th of May 2002, was to sustain and strengthen the containment of Iraq. But we were having problems with containment, which you've referred to in your memorandum and which we've discussed with earlier witnesses. And then there had also been 9/11, which, again, you describe in your memorandum, as others have done, as having had a huge shock effect on the international community, but particularly, obviously, on the United States. And after 9/11, Washington's approach to Iraq changed. As you and Sir Peter Ricketts argued in the spring of, in March of 2002, objectively the threat from Iraq had not worsened as a result of 11 September, but what had, however, changed was the tolerance of the international community, and especially that of the United States. Is that, before I go into my first question, a fair summary of the situation thus far?
Yes, it is, Sir Roderick.
So can I ask, to what extent in this period before and after 9/11, before we in the British government were set on a new strategy, to what extent was there a debate about the strategic options over Iraq? The relevant cabinet committee, which was DOP didn't meet in this period. Were you putting a range of different options before the Prime Minister?
Thank you. May I deal with the period before 9/11 and after 9/11 separately, if I may? Before 9/11, we were essentially trying to contain a drifting policy, which was containment. I came in as Foreign Secretary in June of 2001, and I was briefed on the problems that we were facing with the existing sanctions. I saw papers that my predecessor, Robin Cook, had submitted to the Prime Minister about the future policy that we were seeking, which he had talked to Colin Powell, and the UK government was talking to the UK government about. And as it were, I took those over. And there was then negotiations which got going really in late June of 2001 to try and get these so-called smarter sanctions. And we tried very hard to get this draft resolution through. Sir Jeremy Greenstock, in his memorandum and evidence, has given a great deal of detail about that. But it simply wasn't possible to get agreement. I think the Iraqis were kind of comfortable, and the Iraqi regime, not the Iraqi people, were in a strange way comfortable with this situation. And I've often thought about the facility and the use of sanctions. They can work, but they can also have all sorts of paradoxical and inadvertent effects, like they can lead to corruption, they can lead to a strengthening of authoritarian regime and so on. So there was a sort of weird identity between those who thought we needed to do something about Iraq, those who were in the middle, those who were making money out of the sanctions, and the Iraqi regime.
But the sanctions up to this point had worked.
They had worked up to a point, but from the time in late 1998, when the inspectors left, because the inspectors said they couldn't carry out their task, there was increasing anxiety about what the Iraqi regime was doing without the inspectors being there. And alongside that, there was the anxiety about the enforcement of the no-fly zones. And there were arguments with the French about whether we should run them. There were concerns in the Ministry of Defence about the safety of our pilots, because the Iraqis' missile capability was getting more accurate. So, in a sense, if you ask me where were we in the summer of 2001, in a kind of stodge, the best it can be described as. It was all very difficult, and no one really knew we knew what we wanted to do, but it was very unclear about how we were going to get any kind of agreement. Because I say this strange situation where so many different interests had the same vested interest in the status quo, and that just led to kind of stasis in the Security Council and elsewhere.
Although we did eventually get agreement, as I mentioned, in May 2002, so we managed to drive through the stodge to agreement on smarter sanctions.
Yes, we did get agreement in May 2002, and if I may, could I just then answer your second question about
Please.
What happened post 9/11?